Hi, my name is Vincent Gonto, and I'll be presenting Frankenstein by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. To introduce you to Mary Shelley, Mary Shelley was an English novelist born in London to Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a feminist writer and author of A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and her father, William Godwin, a philosopher and political thinker. Mary Shelley was married to Percy Bysshe Shelley and had one child named Percy Florence Shelley. Some background of Mary Shelley includes being born into a highly intellectual environment. Her mother died shortly of her her mother died shortly after childbirth, and ended up being raised by her father and later on a stepmother. Mary Shelley was largely self-educated throughout her life and was exposed early to radical political and literary ideas by her parents, who were some of the most revolutionary thinkers of the time. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, believed in feminist philosophy. Her mother advocated for women's education and equality throughout her life, and often supported the anti-patriarchy, where she critiqued the idea that women were naturally inferior or only suited for domestic life. Her mother lived openly as a unmarried woman and had a child out of wedlock, giving birth to Mary's half-sister, and rejected marriage as a form of legal oppression for women. Her father, William Godwin, supported anarchist political philosophy. He argued against institutional government and for rational, more decentralized societies. He also supported atheism and rationalism. He promoted reason over religion, often viewed as a dangerous way of thinking in post-revolutionary England. He also supported utopian ideals, believing in perfectibility of man through education, social reform, and science. All in all, this made Mary Shelley to be raised as a person who questioned authority, tradition, monarchy, religion, and gender norms, which was often reflected in her works. Mary Shelley's romantic and adult life. Mary Shelley eloped with Percy Shelley in 1814, fleeing to Europe while Percy was still married. This caused a scandal that made Mary a social pariah. This caused them to end up living in poverty and often ostracized by society. Mary Shelley had a lot of death around her. Her half-sister Fanny Emily died by suicide in 1816. Percy Shelley's first wife, Harriet Shelley, also drowned in a sailing accident in 1822 when Mary was only 24. She never remarried, but she recovered her husband's cremated heart from the fire and kept it wrapped in one of his poems named Adonis in her desk drawer for many years. Mary Shelley suffered frequent bouts of illness and chronic headaches, often speculated to be caused from a brain tumor. Mary Shelley suffered from literary marginalization. Despite her immense talent for writing, she was often dismissed as merely Percy Shelley's wife. Suffering the life of a marginalized woman, she faced difficulty publishing her work under her own name. Mary Shelley's accomplishments and her legacy. Mary Shelley pioneered two major genres being horror and science fiction. She published six novels, dozens of short stories, and many, many more influential travel and biographical essays. She also edited and preserved her husband Percy Shelley's poetic legacy, ensuring his posthumous fame. She also worked on some of she worked she also worked on some works with Percy Shelley. She also was an active contributor to literary and political debates of the time, often anonymously due to gender biases and marginalization. Mary Shelley did not receive any formal literary awards during her lifetime, but as because such awards were rare and largely inaccessible to women in the early 19th century. However, Mary Shelley had posthumous recognition. Frankenstein is included in nearly every major Western literary canon. Numerous films, plays, and adaptations have been made from her work, Frankenstein work, and other works. She is also celebrated in the Oxford Companion to English Literature and the Norton Anthology of English Literature. She also has some statues and plaques commemorated after her, for example, in London and Bournemouth. There was also a prize established in her honor called the Mary Shelley Prize for Imaginative Fiction. Mary Shelley's bodies of work include Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, Valperga, which is set in 14th century Italy following the conflicts between a female noblewoman Euthanasia and a tyrant, The Last Man, set in the 21st century. The novel depicts a future devastated by plague where the protagonist survives the destruction of humanity. The Futures of Perkin Warbeck, based on a real-life figure who claimed to be the lost son of Edward the Fourth. In her story, Shelley explores identity and stories of legitimacy. Lottery, which focuses on a mother-daughter relationship and the struggles of women in society. And lastly, Faulkner, where a young woman reforms a violent man, touching on stories of guilt, redemption, and feminine morality. I also included below some short stories and essays that she wrote because there is a lot, and I included some of the themes of the short stories. Some of Mary Shelley's literary works include Frankenstein, which is her most influential work, defined by modern horror and sci-fi. The Last Man, which is one of the first apocalyptic novels of the time. Valperga, which follows a strong example of female-focused historical fiction. And Lottery and Faulkner, which are stories that advocated for women's rights and emotional complexity in literature. These works cause Mary Shelley to be regarded as the mother of science fiction, a pioneer of Gothic horror, and one of the first feminine voices in romantic literature. Mary Shelley brought feminist and domestic themes into intellectual fiction. Through her works like Lottery and Faulkner, Shelley portrayed women navigating life without male protection, the moral and emotional depth of female characters, a critique of patriarchal institutions like marriage and inheritance. And through all these, Mary Shelley challenged the idea that only male ambition or public life were worthy literary subjects. She quietly incorporated early feminist values and ideas into romantic fiction. Mary Shelley's key contribution that I will be covering: Frankenstein. It is a key contribution because it was able to blend Gothic horror with Enlightenment science. Instead of using supernatural forces like ghosts or demons, Frankenstein is driven by natural philosophy, using scientific reasoning like galvanism, reanimating corpses through electricity. Mary Shelley also introduced the mad scientist archetype in Frankenstein, where Victor is one of the literature's first characters driven by ambition to push beyond human morals and limits, where he created life without divine help. Mary Shelley questioned ethical boundaries of progress. Shelley posed hard questions about scientific responsibility, consequences, and alienation, making Frankenstein the first work of speculative science fiction. Frankenstein the story also used an epistolary structure, where the form of letters are used to layer perspectives and moral ambiguity. These make the reader question who the real monster is. Mary Shelley's impact through Frankenstein laid the foundation for future sci-fi works. In Frankenstein, Mary Shelley also humanized the monster, where the creature is intelligent, emotional, articulate, often found to be human characteristics. These make it one of the first depictions of a sympathetic antagonist. Shelley challenged readers to question what really makes someone monstrous. Is it their origin or how society treats them? Frankenstein blended genres where it was gothic, dark, emotional, and had haunting settings, but at the same time philosophical and speculative. These ended up creating the hybrid genre that we call sci-fi today. Overview and horror elements in Frankenstein. I'll just give a brief summary of the overall story. Past the excerpt began as Frankenstein became obsessed with science after his mother's death, and he attended the University of Ingolstadt, where he learned how to create life by assembling a gigantic humanoid from corpses. At around 1 a.m. on a stormy night, he succeeded, but the yellow-eyed creature immediately scared him and he ran away from it. The creature also ran and hid, learning the language and reading by observing a peasant family. He was able to discover his own origins through some papers that Victor left behind and caused him to feel lonely and rejected. When he finally came back and revealed himself to the family, they were scared and responded with terror, which reinforced his alienation that he felt. Angrily, the creature ran away to another country and murdered Victor's younger brother William, and he framed the family servant Justine and she went to jail. The creature tried to justify his murder by going to Victor and demanding a female companion to alleviate his isolation. Victor reluctantly did it, but ended up destroying her before completion because he was scared of creating a new race of monsters. Enraged, the creature retaliated by murdering Victor's best friend and his fiancée, Elizabeth, on their wedding night. This caused Victor's father to die of grief, and Victor vowed revenge. In the climax of the story, Victor pursued the monster across the Arctic ice. Victor died aboard an explorer ship. The monster found out and mourned Victor's death and announced he would kill himself by fire. Some elements of horror in the story are a menacing atmosphere. The novel opened up on a dreary night of November, with flickering candles and thunder. This immediately set a gloomy, unsettling tone for readers. The dark weather and isolated settings created a constant sense of dread and unease in the minds of readers. Also, nightmarish imagery. In a part of the story, Victor is tormented by horrible dreams where he saw Elizabeth, his dead fiancée, and his dead mother as corpses. Immediately after his experiments, though, these vivid nightmares blurred reality and nightmare for readers. This is a common horror technique that makes the reader share the personal terror of Victor and a feeling of the uncanny, aka the creature. Some themes, horror techniques, and horror subgenres in Frankenstein are hubris and dangerous knowledge. Shelley's story warns of the peril of unchecked scientific ambition. Victor's obsession with creating life led to tragedy of his family and friends, where they all got destroyed and killed. This echoes the theme of a dangerous knowledge found in Gothic literature. Victor's pursuit of forbidden science ultimately destroyed everybody dear to him, and he paid the consequences for it. The Gothic atmosphere and psychology in Frankenstein, where it combines the Gothic trope with deep psychology. The novel features isolated settings, story nights, and dark laboratories, which all foster a menacing, foreboding mood. Victor's own inner turmoil and guilt are foregrounded by these nightmares and insomnia that cast a feeling of dread into readers. Psychological horror subgenre. Much of the terror you feel in Frankenstein is internal. Vic- Through Victor's obsessive guilt, paranoia, and nightmares, it contributes to a mood of creeping madness that you feel. Victor's inner fears and the dread of his own mind amplify the horror for readers, where you're able to resonate and also resonate for the creature. This novel creates a psychological horror where the scariest elements are the character's inner demons rather than external gore. These are some questions. If you want to enter them in the comments instead of giving insight on the story, I'll answer them myself also. How does Shelley's use of vivid sensory imagery and first person narration shape our emotional response to Victor's creation? I say that Shelley's first person narration in the story is able to immerse us in Victor's psychological unraveling, where he creeps closer to madness, and this makes his horror palpable and more relatable to readers. Through sensory details like the monster's yellow skin, watery eyes, and the grave worms, Shelley is able to create a grotesque and haunting image of the creature. And this, and this intimacy of Victor's voice allows readers to feel his dread, his growing dread actually, and disappointment, emphasizing the emotional weight of his catastrophic mistake. What gothic or horror elements are present in Victor's reaction, and how do they contribute to a tone of dread and revulsion in the excerpt? Mary Shelley is able to draw on Gothic conventions such as the stormy night, the midnight hour, creating a supernatural monster, and decaying imagery to invoke horror in readers. The lifeless body, reanimated during its stormy November night, and Victor's reference to a mummy again imbued with animation, mirror the unnatural and monstrous. These elements heighten the dread and depict Victor's scientific triumph as a moral and spiritual transgression. It causes you to feel the inner turmoils more and feel a more psychological horror rather than a supernatural horror. Some insight into Victor's character. What does Victor's immediate horror and regret reveal about his motivations and expectations as a scientist and creator? Victor's shock of creating such a creature revealed a fundamental naive and vanity in his ambitions. His aim was to glorify himself by conquering death and creating, quote unquote, creating life. But he was ignorant and didn't really think about the ethical or emotional consequences of his actions. And his inability to take responsibility, where he ran away from his creation rather than confronting it or trying to destroy it, it exposed his immaturity and the limits of intellectual pride. 4. How did the excerpt reflect the larger theme of unchecked ambition and its consequences throughout the novel? This question is able to. Sorry. This excerpt is the novel's turning point, where Victor's unchecked ambition creates horror. His obsessive pursuit of knowledge led to unnatural creation, and this result is not in success, but instead revulsion and chaos. It foreshadows the devastation that follows when ambition is separated from moral responsibility and more logical thinking of the consequences of such actions. And this is a recurring theme in Frankenstein. 5. In what ways might Mary Shelley's personal experiences with death, loss, and motherhood have influenced her portrayal of Victor's emotional collapse after giving birth to the creature? This question allows you to connect Mary Shelley's background to her works. And so I feel that as Mary Shelley experienced the deaths of her mother and multiple children, throughout her life, she lived through constant grief and anxiety, with juggling with the emotions that come with life and death. In Frankenstein, Victor's dream of embracing Elizabeth, only to find that his dead mother mirrors these emotional traumas that he feels. The repulsion that he feels after giving life to such a creature, it echoes fear and alienation that Mary Shelley felt throughout her life, especially around childbirth and creation. Especially in a world that associated maternity, it makes you both wonder and feel deep sorrow. Thank you guys for listening to my presentation. I look forward to reading your feedback.